Thank you, Martha. We'll take questions now from the panel. There are two microphones back there. If you want to get a question and have each of our panelists turn their mics on, I think Dan's is off. Is on now? Good.
Yeah.
Question to the right, then to the left.
Thank goodness for people's skepticism of the media. I hope you keep doing your job because you create more skepticism the way you're doing your job. What I want to find is that since the prosecution heaped so many charges up on Jackson, the fact that it wasn't sequestered, didn't you think that that like stacked the deck against you? And do you think that putting all those charges on Jackson guaranteed the prosecution would get at least one conviction? Which Mr. Abrams kept saying at the end of the trial. I thought he was going to get convicted of one charge, at least one charge.
Yeah.
Well, first of all,
and also the prior victim or alleged victim, the original victim, why didn't you try to force him to get on the stand and to break him down? Or could that have been done?
well, first of all, as I said before, I had great faith in the jury. It was more of an intuitive feeling than anything else. I didn't want them sequestered. I think a sequestered jury is an unhappy jury, is an uncomfortable jury, and I always fear that that will hurt the defense. I also felt that they were a very stubbornly individualistic and very honorable group who would listen to the judge's instructions and avoid the media. And indeed, since the trial, they have all said that. They didn't know certain things were being said out there. They made a very, very strong effort not to watch TV, not to read the papers. So I put my trust in them in that regard. As far as loading up on charges, I think it clearly was a prosecutorial tactic where they really only wanted him convicted on one to get what they wanted. I always felt the conspiracy charge was bogus from day one, and we used it to help our side out. They had a conspiracy charge that Michael Jackson had organized a conspiracy to abduct children, falsely imprison a family, and to commit extortion. And I think the more the jury learned what kind of a person he is, the more absurd those charges became. I think the prosecution did it for a lot of reasons, some of them tactical and some of them strategic. I think, as I said before, they were hoping that if they just used these charges to dirty Jackson up any way possible, something would fall out in their favor. And they also, in my opinion, were trying to use the conspiracy charge to get in hearsay evidence that normally would not be admitted. There is an exception to the prohibition on hearsay, and that's called co-conspirator hearsay. And what this allowed the mother to do was come in and say, all these people said A, B, C, D, and E, whereas she normally would not be allowed to say that because it would be hearsay, because there was an exception if there's a conspiracy charge. They also did it to scare these alleged conspirators away, so they wouldn't cooperate with the defense and come in to exonerate Michael Jackson. But I think in the process of pursuing what I think was a very disingenuous allegation, they undercut their own credibility, because along with the charges looking absurd and the evidence looking just absurd, there was a timing problem. Because, as we pointed out, they tried to claim that Michael Jackson formed a conspiracy because this Bashir documentary had aired, which was very unflattering. He had then formed a conspiracy to force this family to make statements that exonerated him and then disappear to Brazil. And the molestation is supposed to start in the middle of all of this. And it just didn't make any sense. And I think they really hurt themselves by bringing these crazy charges, because it also allowed me to just point out, you can't believe what they're saying or doing. You know, they will just almost say anything to dirty up Michael Jackson.
Next question.
Pardon me? Oh, first case. Okay. You know, this is interesting because anyone who followed the case knew about the issue of 1108 evidence, which in California is called prior bad acts evidence. And what California allows, and few states do allow, is that in a case like this, you can bring in evidence of other alleged similar acts, even if they were never charged with a crime, and even if they're not the essence of the charge in this particular case. So what they said in their opening statement was, we have evidence that 5 young men were molested, and we're going to present all of that to you. And to make it even worse, it appeared, the judge did something I've never seen happen in a case like this. With respect to 3 of those alleged 5 victims, He allowed witnesses to come in and say they saw them molested without the prosecution having to bring the actual alleged victims in. Okay? So they did that. They put on 3 guards who had worked at Neverland to say they saw these 3 people molested. One of them, Macaulay Culkin, okay, the actor. All right? Now, those 3 guards had sued Michael Jackson, claiming that he wrongfully terminated them. He had cross-complained, saying that they had stolen property from him. It was the longest civil trial in the history of Santa Maria. They lost their case. Jackson won his cross-complaint. He had $1 million judgment against all of them. There were judicial findings of fraud against all of them. They had gone to the tabloids and sold stories, and the 3 people they say they saw molested, they were my first 3 witnesses. They came in and said they were never touched. So when that happens, I think we were able to effectively take all this and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you can't believe these prosecutors. You can't believe their case. You know, they'll say anything to try and win. Now, the one you're talking about never showed up. He's the one who got a settlement in the early 90s. Now, my understanding is the prosecutors tried to get him to show up, and he wouldn't. If he had, I had witnesses who were going to come in and say he told them it never happened, and that he would never talk to his parents again for what they made him say, and it turned out he had gone into court and gotten legal emancipation from his parents. His mother testified that she hadn't talked to him in 11 years. So, you know, there was a problem there as well. There was a 5th alleged victim who testified, who said that Michael Jackson had been playing with him and had gone too far and touched his testicles, and he needed 5 years of therapy after it. And during the first therapy session, the DA was present. And he also admitted he wanted money from him, and his mother wanted money from Jackson, and his mother went to a tabloid and sold the story as well. So you put all that together, and I submit that it helped us.
Next question. We've got about 4 more minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
With all due respect, I think that the trial of the century was neither O.J. or Michael, but the trial of the century happened in the early 90s in Memphis, Tennessee, where it was found that Martin Luther King's murder was a conspiracy, and I think his family was awarded $20 or something like that. My 2 quick questions are, do you believe that there are other external political factors in the Michael Jackson trial, as far as his ownership of the Beatles catalog and some of his Elvis Presley songs? And my second question deals with a trial going on right now in the so-called Middle East dealing with Saddam Hussein. Do you think that it would be a proper legal maneuver to have Mr. Hussein given amnesty for his crimes that he's charged with, just like the racist white supremacists in South Africa were given amnesty through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where they were admitted of their crimes and were let off scot-free?
2 questions. One is, the first one was about whether or not...
Tom take those.
I think that, yeah. Really good question for you.
Whether or not Michael Jackson's ownership of the Beatles
Let me say this.
does that influence the case, and whether or not Saddam should be given amnesty?
Well, I can talk authoritatively about the first issue. The second one, I'm not an international lawyer, and I frankly don't know a lot of the details, except I have trouble believing anybody's going to give Saddam Hussein amnesty, but nevertheless. First question, Michael Jackson has been the greatest target for civil lawsuits I've ever experienced. He's literally been sued thousands of times by people he hasn't met, people he knows nothing about, and yes, there are people who would like to obtain his property, including his interest in the Beatles catalog, and their desire to obtain his assets would have been significantly enhanced if he had been convicted. He would have been disabled from defending cases. If he defended them, he would be walking into court a convicted felon and child molester or conspirator, whatever the conviction might have been. And I happen to fervently believe there were people who were waiting in the wings, hoping he would be convicted, so they would simply walk in and grab assets. Can I tell you definitively that people who want the catalog are in that group? No, I can't. All I can tell you is that he would have been substantially disabled from defending himself in any of these situations if he had been convicted and was in prison.
Any comments on amnesty for Saddam Hussein?
I mean, you know, to my friends and fans, thank you very much for all of your support. Together, we will see this through to the very end.